Bhajan Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 8, entitled Prayers by King Kunti, text number 41. Atha Vishvesha Vishvatman Vishva Murte. Therefore Vishva Isha, the Lord of the universe. Vishva Atman, O soul of the universe. Vishva Murti, O personality of the universal form. Swakeshu, unto my own kinsman. May my Sneha Pasham, tie of affection. Imam, this, Kindi, cut off. Vidham, deep. Pandushu, with Pandavas. Vrishnishu, with Vrishnis also. O Lord of the universe, soul of the universe, O personality of the form of the universe, please, therefore, sever my tie of affection from my kinsmen, Pandavas and Vrishnis. Please repeat. O soul of the universe, excuse me. O Lord of the universe, soul of the universe, O personality of the form of the universe, please, therefore, sever my tie of affection from my kinsmen, the Pandavas and the Vrishnis. Purport by His Divine Grace, Prabhupada. The pure devotee of the Lord is ashamed to to ask anything in self-interest from the Lord. For the householders are sometimes obliged to ask favors from the Lord, being bound by the tie of family affection. Srimati Kunti Devi was conscious of this fact, and therefore she prayed to the Lord to cut off the affectionate tie from her own kinsmen, the Pandavas and the Vrishnis. The Pandavas are her own sons, and the Vrishnis are members of her paternal family. Krishna was equally related to both of the families. Both the families required the Lord's help because both were dependent devotees of the Lord. Srimati Kunti Devi wished Sri Krishna to remain with her sons, the Pandavas, but by his doing so, her paternal house would be bereft of the benefit. All these partialities troubled the mind of Kunti, and therefore she desired to cut off the affectionate tie. A pure devotee cuts off the limited ties of affection for his family, and he widens his activities of devotional service for all of the forgotten souls. A typical example is the band of 6 Goswamis who followed the path of Lord Chaitanya. All of them belong to the most enlightened and cultured, rich families of the higher castes. But for the benefit of the mass of population, they left their comfortable homes and they became immigrants. To cut off all family affection means to broaden the field of activities. Without doing this, no one can be qualified as a Brahmin, a king, a public leader, or a devotee of the Lord. The personality of Godhead is an ideal king, showed this by example. Sri Ramachandra cut off the tie of affection for his beloved wife to manifest the qualities of an ideal king. Such personalities as a Brahmin, a devotee, a king, or a public leader must be very broad-minded in discharging their respective duties. Srimati Kunti Devi was conscious of this fact, and being weak, she prayed to be free from such bondage and family affection. The Lord is addressed as the Lord of the universe, or the Lord of the universal mind, indicating his all-powerful ability to cut the hard knot of family affection. Therefore, it is sometimes experienced that the Lord, out of his special affinity towards a weak devotee, breaks the family affection by force of circumstance arranged by his all-powerful energy. By doing, he causes the devotee to become completely dependent on him, and thus clears the path for his going back to Godhead. Om Gyanti Varandasya Gyanandana Salakaya Chakshuramarihandena Tasmai Shri Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Mutale Shrimati Bhakti Swami Punavare Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Charane Vasisha Sundari Pastuta Vezi Harane Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Shri Gaura Govinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Anandali Lamaya Vigrahaya Himavilivaja Vishundradaya Tasmai Mahapremada Sampradaya Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste. This is a very wonderful example which is being exhibited by Srimati Kunti Devi. And she's basically praying to the Lord that her tie of family affection will be cut. And Srila Prabhupada, he explains here, he starts by saying that pure devotees of the Lord, they never ask anything from the Lord. We touched on that yesterday when we were discussing in the afternoon. We spoke about Kolavecha Sridhar. He would never ask anything from the Lord. The Lord would just literally demand. Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur, when he describes in Chaitanya Bhagavat, he says that Lord Chaitanya was literally screaming. He was roaring like a lion. He was saying, take something. And Kolavecha was saying, Lord, I don't need anything. And then we have the example that we mentioned yesterday also about Prahlad Maharaj. That Nrsingadev was naturally inclined to give something to Prahlad. This is, it's not like doing business. It's not like we accept some type of self-restraining activities, which we do, meaning that we follow the principles and we choose. It is our choice, our conscious choice, not to overindulge in sense gratification. We choose that we will regulate our eating habits. We choose that we will regulate sensual engagement. We consciously choose these things because we understand that by doing so, it will create like a sattvic state of consciousness. And when in the sattvic state of consciousness, it will be more appropriate, or it will be easier for us to meditate deeply upon Krishna. So we choose these things, and it's not that we're doing it because we're simply expecting something from the Lord. Perhaps in the beginning we may be like that, but the process is so purifying. Chanting is so purifying, and engaging in deity worship is so purifying, the association with Vaishnavas is so purifying, that quickly our consciousness changes. Even in Lord Chaitanya's Sikshastakam, when he enumerates the benefits that are to be attained through chanting Hare Krishna, he says, Chaito Dharma Marjana, Bhava Mahadavajana Bhava, Shreya Kaira Vachantika Vitarana, Vidyabhava Jivanam. These are all big gains. He says, Anandam Guri Bharanam. He says that by chanting Hare Krishna, you become self-realized. He says, Shreya Kaira Vachantika Vitarana. He says that when we vibrate the Maha Mantra, the vibration of the mantra they are like cooling moon rays. Just like yesterday when Sanatana Goswami was preaching the glories of the holy name. Wasn't it nice just listening to the description of the glories of the holy name that Sanatana Goswami was giving to Sriman Sailesh? Very pleasing, you know. So Lord Chaitanya says that the rays, the moonlight rays of the Hare Krishna mantra, they descend from the spiritual world into the heart of the conditioned soul. And those rays of the Maha Mantra, they're fully infused with Bhava Bhakti and Prema Bhakti. So therefore, when these rays touch the heart, the lotus of the heart opens. This is the way Lord Chaitanya describes it. And he says, when the lotus of the heart opens, then we become revealed. Meaning that we actually become self-realized and chanting Hare Krishna. And then he says, Anandam Buddhi Vardhanam. He says, then you fall into the ocean of Ananda. And the Acharyas describe that Anandam Buddhi is mentioned because when we become self-realized and we step onto the spiritual platform, then we have the opportunity to actually meet Krishna. After a long time of practice, after a long endeavor, then we meet Krishna. And again, it's not just like business that we're doing because we want some payment. But when we make the endeavor to engaging in sadhana bhakti yoga and we accept whatever restrictions we do accept, we voluntarily accept, and we engage in these activities, that combined with distributing the glories of the Lord, then the Lord, He very much wants to meet us. We have to understand that relationship is very much a two-sided affair. It's not that only we're making some endeavor to go to Krishna, but Krishna is always, making some arrangement that He can get to us as well. But the point that I wanted to make is Lord Chaitanya says, Anandam Buddhi Vardhanam Pratipadam Purna Amrit Aswadam. He says, then at every step of life, at every moment, you just taste nectar. And that tasting of nectar is because, we will have the opportunity to meet Krishna and we'll be trained how to do service for Krishna in the spiritual world. So many varieties of service that the perfect devotees who live there are performing. And then he concludes by saying, what is it? Sarvatma Sapanam Param Vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam. And this Sarvatma Sapanam is Lord Chaitanya. He's sort of scanning the minds of people. And Lord Chaitanya is thinking, well, we always say that this devotional service is a pure thing. And we always say that the spirit of devotional service is totally unmotivated. But here we're talking about Anandam Buddhi. If you do it, you fall into the ocean of Ananda. And then Purna Amrit, you're tasting nectar at all times. So some people will think that by doing this bhakti yoga, or by performing this devotional service, or by following the regular principles, or going out to preaching or accepting some type of austerity or tapasya, you're doing it because you want something in return. You know, it's in the end, it's actually motivated. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Sarvatma Snapanam. He says that the power of Krishna Prema Bhakti and the power of pure devotional service is so wonderful and it's so pure that it thoroughly cleanses any trace of personal motivation from the heart. And he says, Param Vidayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam. Param meaning supreme, and therefore indicating the supreme practice of sadhana, or the supreme spiritual practice in Kali Yuga is the chanting of the holy name. This is Param Vijayate. Vijayate meaning that if you do it, you'll become victorious over the material nature. And he says Shri Krishna Sankirtanam. And Shri Krishna is meaning Shri is Radha and Krishna is Krishna. So by chanting the holy names of Radha and Krishna, we attain perfection. Srila Rupa Goswami, he's also given the definition of pure bhakti. And he's done so in the verse, Anya Vilasita Sunyam Jnana Kamari Anavritam Anukuyena Krishna Anushilanam Bhakti Uttama. And there he says that basically he's making a proposition. He's saying, let's define bhakti. And he's saying that bhakti has primary, say lakshana. Lakshana means qualities. He says there's primary lakshanas and there's secondary lakshanas. And he says the secondary lakshanas, or the secondary qualifications of bhakti are Jnana Vilasita Sunyam Jnana Karmadi Anavritam. So this Jnana Karmadi Anavritam, it means that by engaging in bhakti, this is like secondary. He says one will become free from the desire to experience the benefits of engaging in karmic activities, or even in karma kanda, in meaning elevation to heaven, and enjoying heavenly pleasures. He says, Jnana Karmadi Anavritam. Jnana means experiencing the benefits of jnana, which is the personal liberation. And then he says the primary definition of bhakti, or the primary lakshanas of bhakti, are Anukuyena Krishna Anushilanam. And that means, Anukul means favorable, and Anushilanam, it means cultivation. It means that the sincere devotee, he spends a lifetime in cultivating activities which just give pleasure to Krishna. Meaning, we chant Krishna's holy name. This pleases Krishna so much. I remember so many times sitting in classes given by my friend Srila Indradumna Swami, and he would always give the same example, about if you chant Krishna's holy name, then Krishna becomes attracted. And he would always give the simple example that Prabhupada would give, that if I'm speaking to Charvadeshna, and I'm going, Charvadeshna, did you hear what Prana did? Did you hear about Prana? Did you hear about Prana's mansion that he lives in? Did you hear about Prana's booties? Did you hear about all these things? Then, Prana's here goes, what are they talking about? What are they talking about? He becomes attracted. And when we chant Krishna's holy name, Krishna becomes attracted, and it pleases Krishna. It gives pleasure to Krishna. When we engage in deity worship, Krishna becomes so pleased. When we sing prayers, Like these are prayers of Queen Kunti. And you've all heard Srila Prabhupada sing the prayers of Queen Kunti. Srila Prabhupada loved these prayers so much. He loves singing these prayers. Prayers of Queen Kunti and Brahma Samhita. Prabhupada sang so much. And Shat Goswami Astikam. Prabhupada sang so much. Srila Prabhupada even he alludes to the Goswamis in his purport here, and basically he paraphrases one of the verses of the Shat Goswami Astikam. That verse, what is it? Chak Chitunam Nasisha Mandalapati Shredam Sadatu Chavat Uttarina Ganesha Prabhunaya Kopina Kantasrito Gopi Bhagra Samni Bhakti Lahari Kalola Magnamahur Bande Rup Sanatano Ravi Yoshi Beautiful Palika. What does the verse say? Prabhupada defines it here. He says they were Mandalapati. Mandala means the world, and Pati means the masters. They came from such high families that they were literally the masters of the world. Such high aristocracy. But when they heard about the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they happily gave everything up. It says they simply accepted kolpan to wear, kopina kantasrito. They just wandered in Vrindavan wearing kolpan. And then Srinivasacharya says, but don't think that because they accepted that standard of life, they suffered. They never suffered. Just like this winter, because I was sort of a bit in exile from Kazakhstan. You know, after the bulldozing and then after all of the big international stink that I created for Kazakhstan, and all of the human rights people in Kazakhstan, they said, don't apply for a visa now, because you may become persona non grata if you do it at this time. So I just chose not to go back. And stayed in Vrindavan, and Vrindavan was terribly cold this winter. And sometimes, you know, people would come and we would go out wandering in Vrindavan. And we went to Nandagram one day. Everybody here has been to Nandagram? And who here has been to Terakadamba? Anyone? Terakadamba. Mataji's been there. Huh? I see. You know, who here has been to Javat? Has anyone been to Javat? Well, there's a nice walk. You can walk out the back of Javat and you can walk across to Nandagram. And then about 2/3 of the way in going to Nandagram, there's a little clump of trees out there. And that's called Terakadamba. And basically that's the place where Nanda Maharaja's Goshala was. And it's also significant because that's a place where Rupa and Sanatana Goswami would go. And I remember we were sitting there one day in the beginning of January or something like that. It was so terribly freezing cold. And I was just thinking how they would live under the trees in that weather, just wearing coffins, you know. Maybe have some shawl to wrap around them. In Terakadamba, they said that Rupa Goswami sat there and he wrote Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. He wrote one of the greatest literatures on the science of bhakti sitting under a tree. Yeah. Srinivasacharya says they cut their tie of family affection. They accepted the life that they accepted. But they never suffered. Because the fruit of it was, this is Gopi Bhavan Samrita Bilahali Halolalami Amahur. It says they were always swimming in the waves of the gopis' love for Krishna. They were just always meditating on that. They were thinking about that. They were absorbed in that. And therefore, although they were walking in their kalpans, they didn't feel the pinching cold. Or they didn't feel burning heat of Vrindavan in the summer. Vrindavan is a terrible place in the summertime. Whew. It goes up 45, 50 degrees. Terrible, terrible place. But they were never bothered. When Krishna sees his devotees doing this, Krishna gives mercy. We've always heard in our practice of devotional service that when we perform some devotional service and the circumstances are difficult, then Krishna gives more mercy. So I was reading on here and Prabhupada says that the psychology of Kunti Devi was that she was attached to the Vrishnis because she had family connections, and the Pandavas were her sons. She was pretty much tied up in, the politics of family affection. And therefore she just humbly requested the Lord, please cut it for me. Let me just become dependent upon you. Like Kapila, you come from an Indian family, right? It's like with Indian families, there's really a tight bond of family affection, isn't there? Is it the same with your family? Did your family have fits when you wanted to become a devotee?
Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah, it's very difficult. When I became a devotee, I'm from the South in America, I'm from Tennessee, and I became a devotee in Buffalo, New York. And I just walked into the temple on a Friday night, first time I ever went to a temple, and I stayed. And then a few days later I phoned my mom and I said, Mom, she said, baby, where are you? And I said, well, I'm in Buffalo, New York. She said, baby, what are you doing in Buffalo, New York? And I said, well, I joined the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And she said, well, that's great, baby. She said, what are you doing there? And I didn't know what I was doing. I'd only been in the temple for about 4 days. I had no idea what I was doing. So I turned to the temple president and I said, what am I doing here? He said, my mom wants to know what I'm doing. What am I doing? And he said, well, tell her that you're getting trained up. I said, Mom, I'm getting trained up. She said, baby, that's great. She said, what are you getting trained up to be? And he said, and the temple president said, tell her you're getting trained up to become a Brahmin. I said, Mom, I'm getting trained up to become a Brahmin. She said, honey, that's great. She said, phone me back in 2 weeks. I said, okay, Mom. Then I phoned her back in 2 weeks. She said, baby, you still in Buffalo? And I said, yeah. She said, I spoke to one of your father's colleagues in New York, and I was asking him if he knew something about this Krishna business. And he told me, yeah. Said that it's a religious group from India, and that you people wear bed sheets out on the street. She said, you wear bed sheets? I went, yeah. And she said, and you beat drums and cymbals out on the street, you do that? And I went, yeah. And she said, and he told me that you shave all your hair off, except you leave a little ponytail in the back. Did you do that? And I went, yes, Mom, I did it. And there's sort of like a history that for years, you know, my mother and I had been like having a full-scale war about the length of my hair, you know, and she kept, because I had like long hair, and I had like a long red beard, you know, and she used to call me a bloody communist. Because she figured every communist had to have a red beard, you know. She called me communist, and she didn't like all that long hair. You know, she used to fight. We used to have like good wars, you know. She hated that hair. And so she said, baby, did you shave off your hair? And I went, yes, Mom. Then the line went real silent. And then I could hear my mom on the other end of the phone. She just went, your hair, your beautiful hair. You're crazy. I mean, we've been fighting over this hair for years. And then it's funny because it's like your culture is one thing, being an Asian, you know, such family ties, but our culture, you know, like America during that period, our family wasn't very attached to one another at all. And after I was in the temple for about 2 months, one of my friends back down in Tennessee died. So then I went down to, who was a very close friend, and I went down to sort of console the family. And I turned up at my home, and my parents didn't know I was coming. So I knocked on the door, and they came to the door, and my mom said, yes, may I help you? And she went, is that you? And I went, yeah, it's me. So then I was home for about 3 days, and while I was there, we just, I mean, it was like my parents were asking questions 24 hours, you know. I mean, they were just, and they were so nice, you know, so nice. It was like, you know, my mother was in a grouchy mood, and, you know, no fighting was going on, and, you know, it was like incredible. Then after about 3 days, you know, I had to go to the airport to fly back up to Buffalo. My dad and I went out and got in the car. I said goodbye to my mom, and then my mom came running out to the car in a state of absolute hysteria, crying, and my father and I looked at one another and said, what's the matter with her? And she ran up to the window. She's like, you're going to the monastery. I'll never see you again. But Kunti was saying, please, Lord, just cut all of this. Please cut it. Just make me a dependent devotee. Let me be dependent on you. I don't want to be dependent on my family. I don't want to be dependent on my relatives. I don't want to be dependent on my bank account. I don't want to be dependent on anything. I just want to be dependent on you. And then Srila Prabhupada, he says, he concludes by saying, therefore, sometimes the Lord wants to show His mercy to a devotee who maybe is weaker. And therefore, by His grace, the Lord will actually remove like a big impediment from that devotee's life in order that the Lord will, in order that the devotee will actually become dependent. Now, when I read that, when we were reading the purport, although Srila Prabhupada was certainly a perfect devotee, and not a weak devotee in any sense of the word, but I was thinking of the example of Prabhupada's own life. Because Prabhupada had a number of children, and he had a wife who was like undoubtedly a very cultured lady. probably following like all Hindu rituals and traditions and so on. But the situation was an impediment in many senses. And Srila Prabhupada was working very diligently. Srila Prabhupada described how he was always traveling and he was always selling his pharmaceutical goods that he produced. And there's a story how one time Srila Prabhupada was out traveling and then he got the telegram. And the telegram was from his home, and the telegram said, business has failed, servants have stolen all the stock, please return immediately. And for a lot of folks, if they would get a message that their whole business empire or whatever had just collapsed around them, they may get into distress. And Prabhupada just smiled. And Prabhupada said, this is Krishna showing very special mercy on me. That he's removing things that are blocking me from becoming his dependent devotee. So Srila Prabhupada was very pleased. A number of years ago I was in South Africa, and up in Pretoria there's an Indian man, Naresh Mistry. Anyone know Naresh Mistry? Ever met him? Naresh is a banker, and a real nice, very nice man, such a nice man. And every time we would go up north in South Africa, we'd go visit Naresh, and his tradition is like you just walk into his office and he would always smile and he would always say, "Oh, Vaishnav has come. I'm so happy." And then the next thing he'd do is he'd pull out his checkbook, and he would just turn it around and put the checkbook in front of you. And he'd say, "Write the check." And so generally we always write the check for like an equivalent of about $1,000 or something like that, and give it back to him and he'd sign it. Very nice guy. So it was the same thing. He said, "Oh, Maharaja," he said, "write the check." So I wrote the check. And then I said, "Naresh, how have you been?" He said, "It's been difficult, Maharaj." And I said, "Well, why is that?" And he said, "Well, I was defrauded." And I said, "What do you mean? I don't understand these terms so clearly." He said, "Well, there was a girl who was working as a cashier in my bank. And she had some agreement with some guys who were gangsters. So they were coming to the bank with checks that were drawn on a bank in Johannesburg. She was cashing the checks for them, but there was no money in the account that she was paying out from our bank." And I said, "Well, how much was your loss?" And he said, $3 million. And I said, "Is it covered by insurance or this or that or the other?" He said, "No." I said, what do you have to do to get the money back? He said, "Well, I had to liquidate my home, I had to sell my home. All the savings that I put away for the kids' education, I had to use that. Everything that I had, basically I had to liquidate it, in order to cover the money." And I said, "Naresh, how did you feel when that happened?" He said, "Well, quite honestly, Maharaj, when it first happened, I wanted to commit suicide." He said, "I felt so bad about it." He said, "But then, after like the first wave, the contemplation of suicide," he said, "I reached down and I opened my desk drawer. And so he reached down and he opened his desk drawer, and then he pulled out Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita. He said, then I started deeply reading Bhagavad Gita. And I tried to, in that circumstance, for me it was like a wake-up call, that I had to increase and develop my dependence on Krishna and Krishna's words. But therefore I did so. He said, and that saved me. He said, Krishna saved me. And he said, I saw it really as being a test that was thrown in front of me by the Lord so that I would become more dependent on Him. He said, now, and he said, and I'm recovering. And then I saw Naresh, a year or so after that. I said, so Naresh, what's the situation? He said, oh, Krishna was so kind to me, a few good business deals, this, that, the other, whole amount's covered. So here Prabhupada says, Krishna does this, and he causes the devotee to become he causes a devotee to become completely dependent upon him. And then when we do become completely dependent upon the Lord, then our path for going back to the spiritual world becomes clear. And all the obstacles will become removed by Shri Krishna's grace. Okay, thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Any questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Maharaj, you were saying that Krishna's always making some arrangement to meet us on his side. He's always trying to do that. And sometimes things go wrong, and you could say, well, it's Krishna's mercy. And then the alternative is, well, it's your stupidity. So, does Krishna, if you make a big mistake and you do something very stupid, can you still say that the outcome is still Krishna's mercy? It's still Krishna's arrangement.
Srila Prabhupada had a perspective that failure is a pillar of success. And I know at times when I have blundered in my spiritual practice, what it has done, basically, it's opened the door for sadhus to be able to speak to me. It's sort of opened the door for me to be able to have discussion with learned and realized God brothers and wonderful devotees who actually, help me to see a perspective beyond the perspective of my immediate defeat. And then Srila Prabhupada said that whenever there is difficulty, or whenever we do have some personal failing, that if we do have two things we can do, I guess. One thing that we can do is we can just cry ad infinitum about it and just, moan and groan so much. And then the other thing that we can do is remain, very, very carefully and strictly engaged in devotional service and have our intelligence sharpened and purified by engaging in devotional service. And then by making an intelligent analysis of the situation, we can see that, this is a situation that I shouldn't allow myself to enter into again. It's, this will sound really silly, but I just remember those few short months when I was in Manchester years ago. One evening, when I went there, it was real cold. It was just springtime or something like that. It was real cold. And one night, because I wanted to be warm when I slept at night, I put my sleeping bag right next to the radiator unit, And somehow my knee sort of was leaning on the radiator all night long. When I woke up in the morning, I had a huge blister on my knee like this, you know. So then by, you know, intelligent analysis, I was thinking, you know, best not to sleep with my knees on the radiator. Or, you know, if you stay in the sun too much without any sun cream, you're going to get burnt real bad, right? So by intelligent analysis, you know, I shouldn't stay in the sun too much. Or, you know, in the same way we hear that, you know, to advance in spirituality, you know, the heart should be free from passion, you see. And then by intelligence, you know, we read the words of Bhagavad Gita, and Krishna says that if you contact Rajagun, then kama becomes ignited, or lust becomes ignited. And then he gives a dissertation that lust is the all-devouring, sinful enemy of the world. So then by intelligence, by sharpened intelligence and devotional service, and by analysis, you should understand I should stay free from Rajagun, and I should try to keep myself situated. But sometimes, you know, sometimes mistakes will happen. You see, we may call the wrong shot, we may do the wrong thing, you know. And then Krishna arranges that we have sadhus. You know, we have, you know, kind and loving, caring souls that we can sit with, and that we can talk to, and we can, you know, we can hear from them, and we can, you know, then intelligence will become tuned. I remember one time I was in a situation where, you know, a lot of injustice had gone on, you know, particularly pertaining to the situation that I was in. And I felt like I had sort of taken the hard rap, but there was like a lot of injustice with a lot of people involved, you know. And I was quite perturbed, sort of distressed or depressed over the situation, you know. And then one of my godbrothers, you know, a real good friend and, you know, a real caring fellow, you know, we sat down, we started talking, and I started sort of like, you know, airing my grievances. And he started saying, yeah, I can sort of agree with you, you know. A lot of problems have gone on, and this and that and the other. And he hasn't been very fair. And I walked away from that conversation feeling pretty good that somebody understood me. And then he said, could we speak again tomorrow? Yeah, great, I'd love to. So then the next time I went back to speak to him, he said, well, our conversation sort of went in a particular direction yesterday, didn't it? And I went, yeah. And he said, were you satisfied with that? And I went, yeah. And he said, but now comes the real question. Despite the fact that it appears that some injustice has been done, you know, who is the real cause behind things? Is it just this person or that person or the other person, or do we really believe in the philosophy that not a blade of grass moves without the will of the Lord, and perhaps the Lord is really behind things, and therefore we should see the Lord in every circumstance, and we should have the resolute determination to surrender to the Lord and accept the Lord's will. He says, so what will your choice be? Are you going to remain sort of like on the mental plane about it? Or are you just going to accept the will of the Lord that you should change, and then, you know. And then when I saw the Lord perspective in it, then it was sort of like the light really came on, you know. Or you have that situation, you have that situation in Bhagavatam. Who is that? Maharaja. And he was the king of the world, and he was flying around in his airplane one time, or he was carried and he went to Kailash. You know that story? And he reached Kailash, and he saw, Kailash is real beautiful. Prabhupada says Kailash is just about as beautiful as Goloka Vrindavan. You know, very transcendental place. And he saw this huge banyan tree. And then sitting beneath the banyan tree was Lord Shiva. And Lord Shiva, because he was in his yogi mood, he was naked. And then Parvati Devi, or Durga Devi, she was there. And she was sitting very comfortably, you know, on the lap of Shiva with her arms around Shiva.